Chapter 9 of 813. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 813 by Maurice Leblanc. Chapter 9. Santé Palace. There was one wild burst of laughter over the whole face of the world. True, the capture of Arsène Lupin made a big sensation, and the public did not grudge the police the praise which they deserved for this revenge so long hoped for and now so fully obtained. The great adventurer was caught. That extraordinary, genial, invisible hero was shivering, like any ordinary criminal, between the four walls of a prison cell, crushed in his turn by that formidable power which is called the law and which, sooner or later, by inevitable necessity, shatters the obstacles opposed to it and destroys the work of its adversaries. All this was said, printed, repeated and discussed ad nauseam. The prefect of police was created a commander, M. Weber an officer of the Legion of Honour. The skill and courage of their humblest coadjutors were extolled to the skies. Cheers were raised and paeans of victory struck up. Articles were written and speeches made. Very well. But one thing, nevertheless, rose above the wonderful concert of praise, these noisy demonstrations of satisfaction, and that was an immense, spontaneous, inextinguishable and tumultuous roar of laughter. Arsène Lupin had been chief of the detective service for 4 years. He had been chief detective for 4 years and really, legally, he was chief detective still, with all the rights which the title confers, enjoying the esteem of his chiefs, the favour of the government and the admiration of the public. For 4 years the public peace and the defence of property had been entrusted to Arsène Lupin. He saw that the law was carried out, he protected the innocent and pursued the guilty. And what services he had rendered! Never was order less disturbed, never was crime discovered with greater certainty and rapidity. The reader need but take back his mind to the Denizou case, the robbery at the Crédit Lyonnais, the attack on the Orleans Express, the murder of Baron Dorf, forming a series of unforeseen and overwhelming triumphs, of magnificent feats of prowess fit to compare with the most famous victories of the most renowned detectives. Not so very long before, in a speech delivered at the time of the fire at the Louvre and the capture of the incendiaries, Valenglay, the prime minister, had said, speaking in defence of the somewhat arbitrary manner in which M. Lenormand had acted on that occasion: "With his great powers of discernment, his energy, his qualities of decision and execution, his unexpected methods, his inexhaustible resources, M. Lenormand reminds us of the only man who, if he were still alive, could hope to hold his own against him. I mean Arsène Lupin. M. Lenormand is an Arsène Lupin in the service of society." And lo and behold, M. Lenormand was none other than Arsène Lupin. That he was a Russian prince, who cared? Lupin was an old hand at such changes of personality as that. But chief detective? What a delicious irony! What a whimsical humour in the conduct of that extraordinary life! M. Lenormand, Arsène Lupin. People were now able to explain to themselves the apparently miraculous feats of intelligence which had quite recently bewildered the crowd and baffled the police. They understood how his accomplice had been juggled away in the middle of the Palais de Justice itself, in broad daylight and on the appointed day. Had he himself not said, "My process is so ingenious and so simple, how surprised people will be on the day when I am free to speak." Is that all? I shall be asked. That is all, but it had to be thought of. It was indeed childishly simple. All you had to do was to be chief of the detective service. Well, Lupin was chief of the detective service, and every police officer obeying his orders had made himself the involuntary and unconscious accomplice of Arsène Lupin. What a comedy! What admirable bluff! It was the monumental and consoling farce of these drab times of ours. Lupin in prison, Lupin irretrievably conquered was, in spite of himself, the great conqueror. From his cell he shone over Paris. He was more than ever the idol, more than ever the master. When Arsène Lupin awoke next morning, in his room at the Santé Palace, as he at once nicknamed it, he had a very clear vision of the enormous sensation which would be produced by his arrest under the double name of Sernine and Lenormand, and the double title of prince and chief of the detective service. He rubbed his hands and gave vent to his thoughts. A man can have no better companion in his loneliness than the approval of his contemporaries. Oh, fame, the sun of all living men! Seen by daylight, His cell pleased him even better than at night. The window, placed high up in the wall, afforded a glimpse of the branches of a tree, through which peeped the blue of the sky above. The walls were white. There was only one table and one chair, both fastened to the floor, but everything was quite nice and clean. "Come," he said, "a little rest cure here will be rather charming. But let us see to our toilet. Have I all I want? No. In that case, ring twice for the chambermaid." He pressed the button of an apparatus beside the door, which released a signalling disc in the corridor. After a moment, bolts and bars were drawn outside, a key turned in the lock and a warder appeared. "Hot water, please," said Lupin. The other looked at him with an air of mingled amazement and rage. "Oh," said Lupin, "and a bath towel. By Jove, there's no bath towel!" The man growled: "You're getting at me, aren't you? You'd better be careful." He was going away, when Lupin caught him roughly by the arm. "Here, 100 francs if you'll post a letter for me." He took out a 100-franc note, which he had concealed during the search, and offered it to him. "Where's the letter?" said the warder, taking the money. "Just give me a moment to write it." He sat down at the table, scribbled a few words in pencil on a sheet of paper, put it in an envelope and addressed the letter to Monsieur S.B., 42, Poste Restante, Paris. The warder took the letter and walked away. "That letter," said Lupin to himself, "will reach destination as safely as if I delivered it myself. I shall have the reply in an hour at latest, just the time I want to take a good look into my position." He sat down on his chair and, in an undertone, summed up the situation as follows: "When all is said and done, I have two adversaries to fight at the present moment. There is, first, society, which holds me and which I can afford to laugh at. Secondly, there is a person unknown, who does not hold me, but whom I am not inclined to laugh at in the very least. It is he who told the police that I was Sernine. It was he who guessed that I was M. Lenormand. It was he who locked the door of the underground passage, and it was he who had me clapped into prison." Arsène Lupin reflected for a second and then continued: "So, at long last, the struggle lies between him and me. And to keep up that struggle, that is to say, to discover and get to the bottom of the Kesselbach case, here am I, a prisoner, while he is free, unknown and inaccessible, and holds the two trump cards which I considered mine: Pierre Leduc and old Steinweg. In short, he is near the goal, after finally pushing me back." A fresh, contemplative pause, followed by a fresh soliloquy: "The position is far from brilliant. On the one side, everything. On the other, nothing. Opposite me, a man of my own strength or stronger, because he has not the same scruples that hamper me. And I am without weapons to attack him with." He repeated the last sentence several times, in a mechanical voice, and then stopped and, taking his forehead between his hands, sat for a long time wrapped in thought. "Come in, Mr. Governor," he said, seeing the door open. "Were you expecting me?" "Why, I wrote to you, Mr. Governor, asking you to come. I felt certain that the warder would give you my letter. I was so certain of it that I put your initials, S.B., and your age, 42, on the envelope." The governor's name, in point of fact, was Stanislas Borély, and he was 42 years of age. He was a pleasant-looking man, with a very gentle character, who treated the prisoners with all the indulgence possible. He said to Lupin: "Your opinion of my subordinate's integrity was quite correct. Here is your money. It shall be handed to you at your release. You will now go through the searching room again." Lupin went with M. Borély to the little room reserved for this purpose, undressed, and, while his clothes were inspected with justifiable suspicion, himself underwent a most fastidious examination. He was then taken back to his cell, and M. Borély said: "I feel easier. That's done." "And very well done, Mr. Governor. Your men perform this sort of duty with a delicacy for which I should like to thank them by giving them a small token of my satisfaction." He handed a 100-franc note to M. Borély, who jumped as though he had been shot. "Oh, but where does that come from?" "No need to rack your brains, Mr. Governor. A man like myself, leading the life that I do, is always prepared for any eventuality. And no mishap, however painful, not even imprisonment, can take him unawares." Seizing the middle finger of his left hand between the thumb and forefinger of the right, he pulled it off smartly and presented it calmly to M. Borély. "Don't start like that, Mr. Governor. This is not my finger, but just a tube, made of gold-beater's skin and cleverly coloured, which fits exactly over my middle finger and gives the illusion of a real finger." And he added,